Hi, Duncan Crawford here. Welcome to Top Class, where we're talking about skills and how to navigate future job markets. As technologies transform businesses, what critical skills are needed to succeed in the workforce of the future? With artificial intelligence, the green transition, globalisation and much more all impacting the world of work, there is an urgent need for policymakers, educators and businesses to respond. What needs to happen to ensure people can develop the right skills to prosper in the years ahead? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by two guests. Stefano Scarpetta, the OECD's Director of Employment, Labour and Social Affairs. Hello to you, Stefano.
Hi, Duncan.
And LinkedIn's Chief Economist, Karen Kimbrough.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining me. To kick things off, before we talk about the future of skills, I want to start by reflecting on the current situation. Stefano, if I could start with you, what's the global picture look like? Do people currently have the right skills overall for the jobs market, or are there big gaps in your view?
I think, Duncan, that there are growing gaps. What we have seen post-COVID is actually pretty widespread and also persistent skill shortages. We see that many employers around most of the countries and in most of the sectors actually they're not able to find workers with the right skills. This was a phenomenon we know very well, but specific to some sector like the ICT, so the information communication technology sector. Now is pretty much widespread across a wide range of sectors, from manufacturing to finance to actually the service sector. And at the same time, I think the Adult Skills Survey that we released last week on the 10th of December shows that across a wide range of the 31 countries that participated, adults from 16 to 65 years of age have not seen an improvement even on foundation skills, what we call literacy, so the ability to read and to process information, written information, the numeracy, so the ability to use math in daily work, and also the adaptive problem solving, the ability to basically process issues and information and different contexts. So on the one hand, we seem to be stagnating in terms of equipping people, individuals, the workforce with the right skills, even foundation skills, and on the other hand, a growing demand. And this in a context in which the economy, our, society are evolving very rapidly. We see the information technology with artificial intelligence within the green transition requires new skills. And actually, in many of the OECD countries, at least, we are aging. So we need also to make sure that all the workers can stay into the labor market, remain employable, which to some extent, if not to a large extent, depends also on their ability to adapt their skills to be able to basically adapt to the different needs in the labor market. So yes, on both the supply side and the demand side, we see significant trend and development, but also a mismatch between what is needed by employers, by companies, and what the workers seems to have.
Very interesting. Karen Kimbrough from LinkedIn, let me bring you in. Stefano there talking about these mismatches in skills. You must have lots of data, I imagine, on LinkedIn, which gives you insights into job trends and skills requirements. Is there a need, in your view, for a skills revolution now, never mind in the future?
Duncan, I would say there is. Just to echo what Stefano just said, we definitely see this really big distinction between a rapid growth in demand for certain skills and a relatively slower growth in the supply of those skills. And to echo him again, the demand for green skills is growing at twice the rate. So employers are looking for workers with green skills and they're not finding them. So there's definitely a shortage there. It's this kind of a similar story when you think about the AI evolution or revolution. And then just quickly, you asked me, do I think there is a revolution happening with the skills? And I would say what I think I'm seeing here in our data is that work is changing possibly more rapidly than ever before. And people are struggling to keep up in the sense of how do they upskill effectively for jobs that they don't even know are going to exist in 5 years' time. So there is definitely a need for more support. But the revolution that gives me hope and is the one where I see increasingly recruiters are starting to hire with a skills-based lens, more so than based on what job you had before, what title you held before, what school you went to, what degree you hold. So increasingly, we're seeing more skills focus in the hiring space as well.
I want to get into that in a moment, but to focus on the skills gaps for now, Stefano, if I can bring you back in, Karen there mentioned this rapid need for green skills, for example. What are the main skills that some people are missing at the moment in your view? I know you mentioned the OECD survey of skills before, talking about a lack of literacy and numeracy skills, but are there certain skills that people should be focusing on developing due to the changing jobs markets?
Yes, indeed. I mean, I think we need both the foundational skill we were talking about, as well as actually digital skill broadly defined. I think if we think about the artificial intelligence, in particular with the latest development with generative AI, which is impacting basically almost all jobs in different ways, of course, we need people with a minimum level of digital skills, I would say AI skills, to be able to work side by side with this technology, which is very pervasive, and actually its penetration will increase certainly in the coming months, in the coming years. Right? At the same time, what is new potentially from generative AI is actually requires not only very specialized digital skills, but actually, again, the foundational skills, social emotional skills, or the human skills, the ability to process information, the ability to use critical thinking, the ability to solve a complex problem in outside a formal setting. So these are properly human skills and skills that we have to nurture, we have to maintain, we have to improve on. I think, we have to go no shorter than a Copernican revolution. The usual way in which we have built our skills in the past was first we study, then we use what we have learned in school, university, technical vocational education in the labor market, and then we move on to retirement. I think this notion of learning first, using the skills second, and then leaving the labor market no longer works. We really have to move to a process in which we continuously learn. And actually, we learn how to learn. That's, I think, the most important element of the transformation that we need. And we need actually for the people to know what they have to learn. So we also have to improve the information about what is actually needed in different jobs, what actually the market is requiring. And I think LinkedIn here is playing a major role. It provides us with a huge amount of information about what is new in the job vacancies, for example, in the new job which are posted online.
On that subject, Karen, it's a good point made by Stefano there. Do you have data from employers, or do you hear from employers saying, look, loads of people are missing these skills and we're crying out for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we see a lot of are both educational institutions that are looking to try to be more agile, to create more opportunities and pathways for that continuous learning. And at the same time, we see employers who are posting job descriptions. Sometimes it's 14, 15 million jobs on the platform looking for skills. And we can see that there's a shortage of, if you will, supply of labor for those skills. And the thing that strikes me is that there is some lack of, I guess, efficient process to connect the employers with the skill providers, if you will, the ones who are going to do the skilling and teaching. And everyone's sort of coming to LinkedIn saying, what skill do I need? What skill do I need to train my people for? How do I find that skill? And I'll give you an example of some of the skills that we're seeing. So increasingly, for example, one of the fastest growing roles, I'll just pick on the UK for no particular reason. One of the fastest growing roles in the UK is sustainability manager, and I can tell you that this year on our platform, 10% of the folks that were hired this year were hired into roles that did not exist 20 years ago. So roles are changing so rapidly that I would actually even argue that sometimes employers don't even know exactly what skills they want. They know that AI is here, for example, and they want people who have digital natives and are, able to have a lot of AI literacy, if you will. But they're not quite sure what those skills are. And those skills are going to differ depending on each different department. The AI literacy you need in a finance function is different than in an HR function or a marketing function. So they're also learning, if you will, in real time.
Is it across the board, or are there certain countries and obviously, I suppose, certain industries where there is more demand for specific skills? Do you see regional or countrywide differences?
Yeah, I mean, I would say We look across a multitude of countries, some 200 countries and territories globally, and where the skill shortage has actually been really interesting and to observe has been, for example, in the UK, which is grappling with a lot of different policies and decisions that's changed the supply of their labor market and access to it. And so everything from, if you can imagine, healthcare, which has been a booming industry for a lot of reasons, for demographic reasons, the amount of data they have, they're revolutionizing how they approach handling all the data they have in healthcare and managing it. So they're hiring really rapidly in that industry. And this is worldwide. But in the UK, for whatever reason, there just seems to be a struggle to fill the positions. And there's a constant need for more workers of all types in the healthcare field in the UK. So that's an example of just one. But you could say the same for education. You could say the same, honestly, in a lot of the green energy space. Massive, massive demand. I mean, hiring for anyone who is able to work in the green energy space is about 50% faster than any other job on our platform. So if you have those skills, you get hired very quickly, but they're in short supply. So it's a range of different skills. And I would say it's often industry specific. So retail is going to look very different than manufacturing, for example.
On this point about there's a short supply of certain skills, Stefano, are education systems basically failing to support the development of the right skills at the moment?
Well, you see, I mean, there is an element of that, but it was very interesting what Karin said, that sometimes employers themselves do not really know what kind of skill they need, or actually what is the human capital they have within their own company. I mean, we presented the adult skills survey on the 10th of December. Together with that, we also released the results from the employer module of this survey. This was actually in 5 countries. We asked this time not the individual, but the employers about whether they have the right skills in their workplace, in their company, whether they were lacking skills, but actually what they do in order to recognize the skill, the potential they have within their own companies. And I think many of them said that they're actually lacking people with the right skills. Again, to use more intensively artificial intelligence, for example. But actually, interesting enough, about a third in different countries of the employers admitted that they actually didn't really know the kind of skill potential they have within their own company. They were lacking the tool to assess not the qualification of their workforce, they know that, but actually the actual skill, the potential, what workers can do, sometimes over and above what they're asked to do in the particular job they're performing. So there's a lot to be done to actually recognize skills that people have over and above the qualifications. Many workers may have 10 years or 20 years of work experience. And what they've learned in these 10, 20 years is not certified anywhere. So micro-credential, for example, can be a useful tool for workers to understand exactly what they can do, whether they can move into a new job, whether they can get promoted. I would say actually for the employer themselves to understand, okay, this is the human capital I have within my own company, and maybe they will realize they can do more than what they actually do in their own company. Maybe some of these shortages is not really there.
Okay. Karen, what do you think about micro-credentials in terms of their take-up on LinkedIn and how much credence employers give to them? Are you seeing them, are they more acceptable now to more employers, or are they still relatively niche?
I feel like it's a little bit, if you're at a bazaar and there's lots of different stands offering similar things, and yet you're not quite sure what's the difference between the product being offered at one stand versus another. So there are a lot of opportunities for micro-credentialing. And I'll say first, the uptake by, let's say, younger workers is really encouraging. They are very comfortable engaging in short learning programs that might be 4 hours, might be 9 hours, might be just a couple of weeks. So they really embrace that. We see a big uptake by younger workers. If you want to think Gen Z or millennials, I would say older workers are open to it, but haven't embraced it as much. Now, what you've asked is, what's the degree to which these credentials are being accepted? And I think there's still a problem there. It's a marketplace that's very fragmented and people don't always know what they mean. We're starting to see a few things emerge in terms of micro-credentials, but they're all over the place. And it would be really nice to see some harmonization or standardization of them in some way that made them not only more widely understood and accepted, but also more, I would say, transferable across different job functions, but also different industries. So I think we have a long ways to go here.
I want to just build on that because a very important point that Karen is making. Before you were asking about is the education system failing and what needs to be done? Of course, we have to make sure that the curriculum and the education system sort of keep on updating, taking into account the way in which our economy is evolving. But I think what is also failing, which brings to the point that Karen was making, is also that that's not really equip individuals to understand better where to look for information about what is actually needed in the economy, right? So guidance on the choice of field of study, for example, is something that is developing now, but is not widespread yet. And one of the results of our adult skills survey is that many workers are basically mismatched. So they might have studied one thing and actually work in a different field. And of course, it's a personal choice what you study, but I think providing information through the education system of what the market looks like, not today, but also tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, is very important indeed. But also, I think providing this notion that whatever you study, and almost regardless of the level of education you reach, you might need to actually upskilling or reskilling yourself during your entire working life. So this attitude toward learning and toward always checking where you stand and where you might have to go in terms of skills is something that, again, was not usually provided by the education system. And I think is one of the key features of what has to be taught to people actually seen in education.
On that topic, upskilling and reskilling, given that there's huge concern about the impact of AI on certain jobs, which could lead to the loss of millions of jobs, we're told, according to estimates. Karen, what do you think is going to happen in regards to that with the impact of AI? Obviously, supporters say AI can boost productivity, improve job quality and so on. But there are those as well who warn that it is going to lead to a huge number of job losses due to automation. How can individuals go about reskilling and upskilling, as Stefano suggested, if they've never done that before in their lives before?
Yeah, it's a really important question because I think there's a lot of what I would call AI anxiety about this transition we're going through. And it's true that certain jobs are going to be affected more immediately than others. And I would agree with what Stefano said earlier, that we are expecting to see most jobs impacted by generative AI and AI in the future. I don't think anyone will be quote unquote spared, but some will be more impacted more immediately. And one of the things that we are seeing in our data is really the fact that it's not so much that jobs are going away, but that they're rapidly converting. People are retooling and refocusing on different aspects of their job. So if a job is a collection of tasks that require skills, a lot of workers are refocusing on different skills that are required. So maybe emphasizing a lot more of the cognitive intuition, a lot more of problem solving, a lot more of abstract thinking, and less of the, let me gather as much knowledge as possible and synthesize it in a report. Well, AI could probably do a pretty good first draft in some cases for that. So the more important human skills that are, I think, really relevant and value add are coming through now. But the trick, and Stefano mentioned this, is like people don't quite know what they should be skilling towards. And that's partly why I raised the fact that jobs are just changing so quickly now relative to 20 years ago, that it's a little bit of, there's a lot of AI anxiety. But if I were to leave people with one bit of hope, is historically, many jobs are created. At the same time that there is disruption, many jobs are created. And the trick is we need to help people make these transitions from a place of AI anxiety to AI empowerment, if you will.
And so anyone listening who might be feeling anxious and wondering about what skills to focus on teaching themselves or doing a course in, Stefano, what advice would you give? How should people be preparing for this even more integrated AI world in the future?
Well, I think the first point, Duncan, is that we have to sort of lower a little bit this level of anxiety. I mean, so far, for example, the penetration of artificial intelligence has not led to job destruction. We have interviewed 2,000 companies in manufacturing and finance in 7 countries, and there is no evidence that there's been a substitution with artificial intelligence basically replacing humans, replacing workers so far. Maybe things will change in the future. Second, sometimes people think that working together with AI requires completely different skill set. And in fact, this is not the case. There are some skills that actually are needed in addition to what people already have, but many of the skills workers have will actually be very complementary to what actually artificial intelligence can do. We have run an analysis in 10 countries, and we have looked at AI, high exposure to AI sectors and occupations. And what is interesting, 72% of these vacancies, again, in AI-intensive occupations, they actually require managerial skills and process-solving skills, not really AI-specific skills. And interesting enough, in 50% of these job vacancies, they require what we call soft skill or human skills. So not specifically AI-related skills. So there's a lot that we can do in order to equip workers to these skills over and above some specialized AI skills. I mean, we will need certainly developers, coders, but I think this is only a small fraction, of course, of the workforce. Many more workers will be exposed to work side by side with artificial intelligence, but for that, they may actually need the limited digital skills and more of the other, more complementary skills. I think in order to reduce this level of anxiety, which is fully understandable, we need really to process more this information, make it available to everyone, to give them sort of a compass on what to do in a context in which the world is changing, the technology is evolving very rapidly, and so on and so forth. People do not have this compass, and sometimes, reasonably enough, they are anxious because they see all these things and they might think that the job will completely be taken over by AI, and therefore they are anxious and worried about it.
Karen, what do you think should happen then? What do you think policymakers and businesses should be doing to address these issues?
Yeah, it's clear to me that it starts with how do we think about hiring? And one, I think the employer has to play a role in this continuous learning that we've been talking about. I think it's not sufficient to put this onus on the government or on educational institutions alone because they just don't know what the skills are. And from what my read is, they're very eager to try to prepare learners, young learners and middle career learners, but they don't know how to. So employers are the only ones who really are going to be in a position to say, these are the skills I'm looking for. And I want to just emphasize one thing that was just mentioned by Stefano, which is really the fact that we're moving away from this place where we're only looking at digital skills. And we've talked about digital skills, we've talked about the importance of green skills, but those human skills, those emotional, social skills are rapidly becoming more important. And I'll just give you one fact, and I'll promise I'll answer your question, Duncan. We've seen like a 30% increase in executives. So this is very senior. These are not, new career entrants, but in executives adding these human skills to their profile because there's a recognition that that's actually the right complement to this move towards more digital, more technological advancements with AI is you need that human component of judgment, of empathy, of nuance, of management. And so we're really seeing a big increase coming through actual workers, senior and mid-level, adding these human skills. But what do I think we need to do is one, bring in the employer. I think two, there needs to be a lot more focus on creating multiple pathways for learning. I think the single pathway where we all finish high school and then we all perhaps go to college or some sort of vocational training, it's just not sufficient. People are in different places in their career, as Stefano mentioned, and they're moving around and maybe there's a bit of a mismatch. And so we need to be meeting people more where they are in more micro climate of courses. And these courses on LinkedIn, for example, can be really like almost nano courses of 4 or 5 hours where you can start to build your way like Legos towards something that feels like a bridge to a new career path. Because people really, truly do not know exactly what they want, but they know what they're good at and know what they're interested in. And I think they just need more of a roadmap than they have right now.
Stefano, what do you think about that? Is there anything you'd like to add in terms of how policymakers should address the current skills shortages and the future skills shortages, which we're predicting due to AI and the green economy and so on exploding over the next few years?
No, indeed, Doug, I think before you were asking the question, are we failing on the education system? I think we provide some answer to that. But the other thing where we are not doing well, actually we are failing, in my view, is actually making sure that lifelong learning is not a nice slogan, but is a reality. And we know it is not. I mean, across a wide range of the OECD countries, from the one who spend a lot of money on training and retraining for adults to the one who spend the less, we do see a gap in between those who have access to training or training opportunities and those who do not have access. And unfortunately, this gap is always at the disadvantage of those who are more vulnerable. The low skilled versus the high skilled. Older workers compared to younger workers, those working in large companies compared to those working in small companies. So all of those who potentially need more training, retraining opportunities, in general, across all the OECD countries, receive less training. Now, is it an issue of resources? Yes. I mean, many workers say, I would love to participate in training, but I do not have the resources for doing that. But actually, Karin made a very important point before. The other major barrier to participation in training is actually time. If you work in a small and medium-sized enterprise, the idea that you can be away from your company for, say, a month or two to participate in training is simply not even imaginable. Because a small company of, say, 10 employees cannot have 2 of them going on training. It will not survive. It will not be able to operate. So we really have to create the condition whereby lifelong learning becomes something that we discussed before, in which people are really motivated to do. Really, I want to continue to invest on my skills. And also, I know what to do. I know what kind of training do I need. So I need information. But also, I have to have the capacity, the possibility, the time to be able to participate in training. And there are a number of interesting examples there, where, for example, for the small and medium-sized enterprises, they put them together, right? So a cluster of companies in which they share the workers for the time in which the workers participate in training, so that this is not disruptive for the operation of these small companies. I think the technology here, artificial intelligence, can be a major tool to reduce these very long, very generic training courses into something shorter, more targeted, perhaps provided online, all things that can make actually training more interesting for the workers, but also more doable in terms of the time that is needed. And actually the fact that these training courses may lead to concrete, immediate outcome. Also when the workers go back into their own company, their own activity, and maybe they are able to perform better. Micro-credentials, so a recognition of what they've learned that actually can be also shown by them to the employer or to other employers in the future.
On that point, I understand how it works from the current employer's point of view, but from a prospective new employer, if you've got degrees and diplomas which are widely recognized, how does it work with a micro-credential where, as Karin said earlier on, you might not be sure about the quality of the course? How do you judge as an employer whether or not the micro-credential is worth what it says it is on the piece of paper?
I think that it's really a challenge. I think we know that the benefits of hiring based on these additional credentials or micro learning experiences pays off, because often what happens is it widens the talent pool. It's something I didn't get a chance to mention. I think maybe we all know it, but I'll just say it. From our data, when we see employers base their hiring on just a skills taxonomy and not on degree or prior title, sometimes they can expand the talent pool by as much as 10 times. In the US, it's actually closer to 20 times, simply by saying, well, who might have this skill based on that credential? Now, the trick is, how do I know whether you have real proficiency or you just sort of passively listen for, a few hours and you don't really have any skills? That is really, really tough. I don't have a solution for it. I will say that we are starting to see certain firms embrace this approach a little bit more and be willing to explore it. So we've actually seen mid-sized firms, which surprised me, honestly, be the most forward in terms of being willing to encourage recruiters to use skills instead of, job titles. And it might be because that way they can be more competitive. But I don't have an answer for you, Duncan. I don't know. I'm curious, Stefano, if you have an answer.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Karin. I mean, I see also in the data we have a lot of effort to move into what we call a skill-first approach, right? So you recruit on the base of what people can do over and above the educational qualification credentials. I mean, education credentials are essential. Let's be clear on that. We don't need, because there's a fundamental also to build the skills. The problem is, what is the metrics on a skill-first approach? I mean, how do we assess the actual skills of people? Right? The micro-credential can be a way. So this is my qualification. This is what I learned in school. These are my educational qualification. But this is also on the top of that, the sort of recognition of what I'm able to do over and above my qualification. But we need to develop standards that actually can allow people to be certified for these skills they have developed. So we are lacking sort of metrics on which both employers and workers can basically get together and make sure that the job actually match very well what people can do over and above their qualification. We are not yet there. So the skill-based recruitment, the skill-based approach is a very good move. And I'm glad to say that many middle-sized companies are moving to that. But we need to work more into making sure that workers can have their skills actually recognize and they have credential that they be able to show to the employers. Otherwise, I think, through an interview, it might not be enough to assess these skills and competencies.
What has to happen practically then, Stefano, in that case? Do you mean that there has to be a national accreditation of some kind where there is a standard for micro-credentials, where that means companies are aware that people doing those courses are receiving the skills that they say they're trying to attain?
I mean, ideally, yes, but this is a long way to go. So I think basically, when we talk about foundational skill, this can be sort of achieved, acquired through the standard education system at different level. But then what many employers are looking for are other social-emotional skills, human skills, managerial skills, teamwork, spirit and attitude, and so on. These are the kind of areas in which accreditation, I think, and microcredits can be particularly important. And frankly speaking, this can be achieved through even a short training course in which you can learn something, and on the end, at the same time, you can also be credited for the other sort of soft skill or human skill that you might have. I think that would be important. And then, of course, making sure that these credentials are recognized by a wide range of employees is the next step. And moving to a standardization would be the next step. But I think there is a lot to be done to actually make sure that workers can be recognized for these skills, even though these skills might not be the particular focus of the training in which they participate. A number of interesting examples in which training include sort of learning on a particular topic and field, but also certification for more broader, again, human skills that people may have.
I wanted to add something to what you said is I think this question of measurement is really important. And I hear it a lot. And do I have a solution? No. But I absolutely hear from employers that they're actually struggling to figure out how to measure the proficiency of someone's management expertise, their leadership, their problem solving. And there might be ways and metrics to get there, but there are actually right now, a lot of employers are really undertaking a lot of work to do assessments of the current employees they have to try to understand those skills and then try to say, well, how do we assess a really good manager? Is it someone who can only manage people who are in the office or people who are remote or people who are junior, or is it a mix? And so there are lots of different ways to assess some of these, what you might call human skills or softer skills. And I think we're also on a journey to figure out how to get the right metrics for that. So it's not just a question of how do we assess the credentials, generally speaking, whether they're for more specific skills or more human skills. But I think it's also just this measurement generally that has been a hill we all have to climb.
Very interesting points. Stefano, let's just pick up on something about the survey of adult skills, because obviously it's just come out. There's loads of interesting data in there revealing, how literacy and numeracy skills have dropped in many countries on average, but also the drops have been bigger for the lowest skill. Tell us about that.
No, absolutely, Duncan. That's one of the most worrying result of that. I mean, we said that the average level of proficiency in literacy has declined in most of the countries. Only 2 countries actually saw an improvement. But in most, if not all of the countries, these, stable or actually declining competences is due to the fact that those at the low end of the skill distribution have actually worsened their performance over the past 10 years. So there's been a widening of the gap in proficiency, in literacy and numeracy. And this is particularly problematic because we are saying that those who are already lagging behind are lagging further behind. And we might actually lose them at the time in which we need exactly the opposite. So we need to equip everyone with basic foundation skills to be able to navigate this very rapidly evolving world of work we have been talking about.
Given the situation which Stefano has just described, I want you to get your crystal ball out for me, Karen. What will the jobs market look like in 10 years' time? And are you optimistic that people will be able to have the skills necessary to meet the demands of that job market?
I am optimistic, and I'll tell you why. I'm optimistic because as much as I have sort of been banging the table that work is changing and there are new jobs, This whole transition we're going through is going to take quite some time. And I think people are pretty agile. I think we're going to iterate as we go. And so I actually think people will be able to adjust to the changing needs in the workplace for different skills. What I worry about is a little bit what Stefano just mentioned, which is that there are certain groups that are more vulnerable in the transition, that maybe have less access to time and resources, or maybe getting less targeted interventions. And so I'm keen to make sure that we kind of bring everyone along. I'm not worried that there won't be enough jobs. I'm not worried that people are going to be wholly mismatched to the work we need at hand and only, AI bots can do it. I don't believe that for a second. But I do think that there are certain groups that need to be targeted to make sure that we can bring everyone along. We don't just leave pockets of occupations or different demographics, by geography, by age, by gender behind.
On the subject of making sure we don't leave people behind, Stefano, if you could change what happens in schools or universities, for example, what practical steps or step would you take, which isn't fantasy pie in the sky, but you could realistically make the change happen now? What would you like to see happen to ensure that people aren't left behind?
You see, Duncan, there is a famous book by the Nobel Prize in Economics winner last year, Claudia Goldin, with Larry Katz, The Race Between Education and Technology, right? So far, I think we always won. Previous, industrial revolution, different revolution, we won this race. So we managed to actually skill and upskill the workforce to be able to basically catch up with the development of technology. I think Karin was making a good point. Now, the new technology, digital technology, artificial intelligence are progressing very rapidly. And there is a challenge as to whether we can win this race again. And I think this basically call on reforms across the board. They call a Copernican revolution before. We need to reinvent the education system. We have to provide much more guidance and adaptation of the curricula of both academic and more technical vocational education. But in my view, we need more and more to make sure that people can continuously upgrade their skills and competence during the entire working life, actually during the entire life. I think here the technology and digital technology, artificial intelligence can be really a tool that will enable that, will help us enabling that. Because we can make training courses more targeted, more modular, with micro-credential, more online. So all the things that can enable us to overcome some of the barriers basically have made access to training or training opportunity, or even the willingness to participate in training, somewhat more difficult in the past. And I think, the other positive element is that new generation, I think, know that very well. They know very well that whatever they study in the school or university might not be enough to navigate a changing world of work. So they know that they have to continue to upgrade their skill and competence. We have many more students that finish their studies, they go into the labor market, they work for a few years, they go back to study, and then they come back into the labor market. This is not something that my generation actually used to do. We were still used to study, finish our studies, and then move into the labor market, stay there. Think that whatever we have learned during our education period will be enough to navigate the labor market to our sort of working life. This is no longer the case. People might have to reinvent themselves. Karin said before that they might have changed not only job, but occupation sector a few times during their working life. So I think the new generation are ready for that. I'm a bit more worried that those already into the labor market that were not used to this kind of approach are having and will have more difficult. So we have to focus specifically on them, on those who potentially can be more vulnerable. And these are not only those with low level of competence and skills. Even those who think they have the right skill, they have not yet realized that their skill might become somewhat obsolete maybe in 5 or 10 years' time.
If I could jump in, I just wanted to add on to that. I 100% agree. One of the things that we've seen in our data is that people are having many more jobs. So the labor market, in a sense, is becoming increasingly dynamic. Across our, cohort of data, what we see are people today who are graduating are 10 years into their career, they have twice as many jobs as people did, 15 years ago. So already, even at the end of the career, people are moving around a lot more. I don't see any reason for that to stop. And I think that it just speaks to the dynamism of the labor market. That's a very healthy thing. I think it's good when people are moving around a little bit. It'll help get them to that perfect match. But what I do want to say, and then I'll stop here, is when we ask workers if they want upskilling, 80% of them say, I absolutely do. I want my company, my employer, whomever it might be, my educator, the system, to invest in me to provide me the best skills. They are 80% in for it. However, when we ask, are you currently getting any of that skilling or investment from your employer? Less than 40% say yes. So there is a big gap between what people want and what they feel they're getting. And so there's a lot of work to be done there.
Can I ask a question, Karen? Do you see a change in the attitude of employers? Because, this is indeed what we also found in the data. But post-COVID, with this sort of widespread labor shortage, I saw many employers changing their mind. They're realizing that they need to invest on training and retraining. They cannot always go on the market and get the worker with the right skills, and they have to have the perfect skill they need, right? They realize that they have to be more adaptable, and maybe they have to invest more on the human capital, the workers they have already in the company. Do you notice that in your data?
We do notice that in our data. And what we see in the way it manifests actually is that we see a lot more internal mobility. So companies are not only investing in the talent they have, but they're also trying to find opportunities to retain that talent, move it around the company. And so the internal mobility to me is a manifestation of that. Like, I want to continue to invest in this talent. I'm not just going to have this excellent person tucked away in one function, one job, but I want to grow them. And people, by the way, they want it. They expect it. And apart from changing jobs for more money, the other thing that people really, really want is to be invested in. So we're seeing this change in mindset, if you will, at the company level, across, nearly all the companies that we speak to and see on our platform.
On that subject, because we are running low on time when we're talking about how people can upskill, and if you had to pick one, which essential competency or skill would you say, Stefano, will most help people succeed in the workforce of the future, the workforce 10 years from now?
That's an impossible question, Duncan, because I think, let me be clear on that, without the foundation skills, I think the other additional skill may not actually work very well. So I think we have to make sure that everybody has the foundation skills, have to be able to read complex text, have to be able to use a bit of math and have some minimum digital skills, but also, and that's the most difficult part, especially when it comes to education system, be able to, again, develop these human skills or the soft skills, including the ability to solve problems, which sometimes, you don't do that outside a very clear framework during your education or even high school or even university. On the basis of that, on these foundation skills, then of course people have to develop more specific, more vocational, more technical skills. But I think the foundation skill and the fact that our adult skills survey suggests that we have actually not improved, we have gone some step backward, is certainly extremely worrying. And again, if anything, I think a foundation skill for everybody, including those for different reasons, might drop out from school too soon or might not be able to basically complete the higher or tertiary level of education. So equipping everybody with those skills which are essential in order to even understand what you get out of AI. I mean, if you don't have critical thinking or critical skills you might not be able to distinguish what is right and what is wrong. And this technology is going to be pervasive. So we might be bombarded by tons of information. Are we in a position to assess what is right, what is wrong, whether the piece of information I'm getting is actually trustworthy, I can use it because actually it's what is real? That is going to be a challenge, I think, going forward.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I've often been asked that question, and I often say things like abstract problem solving, critical thinking, because AI is going to solve the problems that are sort of like formulaic, that have been solved before. But when you are, wherever you are in your life, in your workplace, in your family, and you're faced with a problem that you've never had before, I don't think AI is going to be set up to answer it. I think you're going to need your own framework that you're going to create on the fly. And so that's where I get to the point of critical thinking, abstract problem solving as I think one of those critical skills. The other one that I would say, and this is the one that we see uniformly most in demand by employers, is communication. And the ability to modulate your communication, whether you're going to be, I'm going to come on a podcast, or I am going to speak to entry-level workers, or I am going to speak to very senior level C-suite folks who just want a summary and a so what. Modulating your communication effectively around complex or technical topics, but in human terms, is a massive skill, and nearly every employer looks for it.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I give you both A-star grades for your communication skills. Thank you to both of you, LinkedIn's Chief Economist, Karen Kimbrough, and Stefano Scoppetta, the OECD Director of Employment, Labour and Social Affairs. Thank you both for joining us. If you want to learn more about skills, you are in luck. An OECD report on the skills first approach is out. You can check that out on the OECD website, along with the recent launch of the Survey of Adult Skills, which is also full of the latest data on the skills of adults in 31 countries and economies. Please do check that out. Thanks again to my guests and to everyone who has listened to this podcast. Please subscribe if you're a fan, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Top Class. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Stefano.